O King, my King, the distorted, schizophrenic eye of unbelievers is not a thing to be understood, because error is not something one can rationalize. We can but justly rationalize errors as illness, one that presides either in the senses, the inability of thoughts to establish confluency in belief, the inability for the will to yoke the troubled body, or the dimness of a man's soul. All the results of men being maimed by the evil one. I ask you to consider these things when dealing with heretics, schismatics, apostates, and infidels of all kinds. 1. Two kinds of men commit error. The first know well he's doing so, wicked and wanting to see others in pain, like those wretched boys who torture animals. The second, however, is like one that eats food which malnourishes him and deteriorates his senses, and in his malnourished state becomes less and less able to discern what he eats. You, my King, must discern the difference between one who is of incomplete understanding and one who is of contorted understanding. The incomplete one only seeks clarity, but the contorted one shall become prey to his own error. Contortion comes from the routine practice of vice and the negligence of virtue, whereas ignorance is simply an unfinished perspective. 2. The first and greatest illness of all in heresy is the defect of original sin, which comes from the moment of a child's conception, captures and ensnares the child with the predilection of a self-subservience. The grace of baptism is not only a renewal in a person, but creates a second force in a man that contends against the predilection of the first, causing a stir within. Until the child or the fully matured adult encounters that stir, they can only look at what is holy from afar and gape in wonder, like watching a dance, but being unable to learn its steps. A rightly ordered will ascends the corruption of the flesh and seeks the baptismal font. It is best for a person's parents to accomplish it as soon as possible, that evil does not ensnare one fully before they see the wonders and beauty of God and His divine order. 3. Baptized men, due to having the grace of a contending force against original sin, can become the best of men. They have the potential of acting in the clarity of not being ensnared by the affect of vice brought on by the defect of original sin. But they can become the worst of men in that they allow their wicked urges to prevail. They see how baptism works in a man and can use it as a weapon against good, understanding the spiritual fire and how to suffocate it. Choosing on purpose agency to infernal things, who delight in nothing more than to see the desecration of holy things, whatever delight is to be had by darkness. If one is baptized, believe them capable of great evil, for Satan was once a great angel. 4. What imminently becomes fixed in a man's heart is the result of an attitude espoused by the will, just as dogs will inevitably wander towards where they smell the meat. Attitudes are attracted to morning or evening knowledge. Those attitudes attached to evening knowledge will inevitably bring a fixation of evening knowledge onto a person. I shall discuss with you 5 attitudes I believe can attract man into error, stagnate a man, or recover him from error. And any living human, no matter how oppressed or possessed, can take on an attitude and begin his own recovery. For eternal darkness cannot take place on a man whose heart still beats, for his soul, no matter how eclipsed, can be pierced with the grace of God, but let us remember that salvation comes from God alone. 5. The first attitude, which is subject to the greatest of prejudice towards error and heresy, is one of rebellion, disobedience, pride, and destruction. Such men are never to be dialogued with or listened to. Those who dwell perennially in such an attitude live within an untamed flame, which subjugates their will. Their own soul becomes to them something so inconvenient that they resolve to want to consume even that, because the sense of nobility it reminds them of cannot coexist with the sense of wildness they espouse. These ones become so ensnared by this paradox, they look upon the reflection on themselves and hate what they see. Yet how can one, if they truly hate themselves, think themselves capable of making meaningful observations about themselves? Humility is true self-loathing, because the light of humility enlightens one to observe how distant he is from God. A false self-loathing is one of pride, for if a proud man truly loathed himself, he would become debased and would surrender his life not to demonic oppression, but to angelic influence. Therefore, we can presume that the demon has him gripped, and he hates not with his own hatred, but with the demon's hatred of him. 6. This attitude's immanent construct is a perennial state of pain and the need to destroy. Rebels have only Satan as their father, for he is the father of the first rebellion. Rebels and betrayers are of no value to God, and the attitudes are of no value to the soul. One can only disobey authority if the authority speaks observances of vice rather than virtue. Yet one can still never disrespect the office of that one in authority if he is indeed ensnared. If your father gives you a command to submit to vice, you may disobey your father, but you can never disown him. You have the ability and now the obligation to supplicate to God for him to be saved from his corruption. If we were cursed with a corrupted pontiff or judge or emperor or king, we supplicate to God and ask him for instruction and allow him to repair the office, for he possesses that authority which we cannot. If you were to become corrupt, my king, I would continue to serve you by praying for you incessantly until your corruption is defeated. The base status created by the perennial practice of this attitude is simply this: abandoned to the wild. And many who were abandoned cannot digest that they were the victims of the negligence of their appointed authorities. But if they can but entertain that thought for a blink of a second, even they can be redeemed. 7. The second attitude, which leads to error, but not to the magnitude of the first, is that of wanting all things to remain as they are, the attraction to security, comfort, and cyclical living. Such an attitude manifests in two statuses. The first status is the result of when the attitude oscillates between conservation and the desire to consume for pleasure, which causes the error of materialism and avarice, leading only to a rationality that bases itself entirely on gain and loss as it pertains to matters of the flesh, while completely disregarding the matters of the soul. Such mercenary thinking is of very little use to God. We call this status petrified. We must dwell on celestial wonders and not worldly matter. 8. The second way in which this attitude of stagnancy afflicts the person is if it oscillates instead between conservation and the third attitude, which I will arrive to, that of confusion and attraction to novelty. Such ones arrive to great empty places, consumed by nothingness, not merely self-destroying, but self-obliterating. All progress becomes cast aside, convictions failing, yet worried so much that evil will prevail on them, never allowing good to prevail on them. We call this status in a void. These ones struggle to respond to even the warmest of gestures. 9. You must recall as a child the first of your memories. You did not think of hating, but of learning. Your mind was empty and you looked to fill it, and it filled aplenty. The third attitude is this one that leads to, at the very least, a chance for a man to become centered in God. And that is one of curiosity, inquisitiveness, novelty. Children at earliest memory tend to be born into it, and yet if unchecked, original sin will gravitate a child's attitude towards his own bastardization, the disorder of requiring security, and the great disorder of rebellion and destruction. But in this attitude, hope can breathe. Men can be moved by miracle and wonder, and might elevate towards belief at beholding the power of God, if still not being able to trace God's presence. But this is precisely what belief is, for the wind is difficult to trace with the eyes, but is detected with the other senses. 10. And so, the first status that prevails on men who hunt for novel thoughts is that if they happen to pioneer into new territory, pushing the frontiers of the unknown, they can be brought into a state of belief. Belief is a state one enters when he is incapable of confirming knowledge with his senses. Even unbelievers can have an understanding of this status when they see their loved ones off and understand that their loved ones will return to them without constant assurances. But belief can only begin in the fourth attitude, not yet mentioned, but that attitude of self-denial. We may call this fourth status swimming, for it treads to the frontiers of the unknown. 11. The fourth and fifth attitudes, respectively, are of self-denial and true love. Self-denial is done in part to make sacrifices for gain, which all men come to understand in some small part, such as laboring for wage. But true love is done without any want of gain for the self, but only for the other. Christ told his apostles that there was no greater love than to lay down one's life for another, not measuring the cost. Our Lady never measured the cost, for she always loved with a perfect love, serving our Lord to the last drop of his blood as he hung on the cross, and more after that by suffering his absence to guide the apostles. 12. The three statuses that prevail from the practice of these attitudes are much more uncommonly seen in men. The first status is flying, for one sacrifices his weight in order to ride the wind. The second status is freedom, for after having sacrificed his weight, he is freely capable of loving God without restraint. And the last status, the greatest, is oneness with God, which is perfected agency to the morning light and the ultimate predestination of any man. These I will not discuss further, for I report on heresy, and forgive me for the length of this report, my king. 13. As a king, you must understand the state of being a just ruler means understanding the afflictions of those you rule, like that of being a good father, identifying what plagues his children and how to motivate them out of their illnesses. You respond to violence with chastisement, to stubbornness with firm force, and so on. The spiritual bodies that take on your children, that is, their faults and errors, you must deal with, each according to appropriate measure, as you are appointed as their authority. If any of these spiritual bodies are beasts born by false prophets, you must never give support to these beasts, but sing them to sleep until they become dispersed, until the true woman can stamp out the false one with her heel. for error grows like a malignant moss where the light of truth is neglected. 14. A just ruler at all times loves all of his children, and the severity of his judgments merely testifies his love for those children and his love for the just judge. He is merciful if he sees capacity, and he is harsh if he sees despair. But let yourself always err on the side of mercy if it is unclear to you. 15. Infidels and those whom seek to usurp your rule have no place in the kingdom and are not your own children, for they are not the children of your mother, the Holy and Apostolic Church. They are to be quarantined until you can expel them to their own lands, where they will one day be conquered by the missions of the Church. If you fail to do this, they will treat you and your children even worse. 16. If men are wild in your kingdom, then your judgment should chastise the wild according to what makes them wild, so that they have a chance to reflect, or so that others might self-reflect looking upon the example you made of them. For if a child breaks a window, you sentence the child to atone for the loss of that window. Mercy is something you may employ, but mercy has its limits. For if you are a teacher who grades his students and you set the conditions of them to earn each a high grade, and some fulfill and others do not, it is not just to those who fulfill the requirements that others who do not fulfill those requirements be given the same grade. Mercy is a different form of atonement for those who've themselves been victims of injustice, that they might also show others mercy. We ask the Lord in the Lord's Prayer to forgive us as we forgive others, and so you must remember to be merciful as the Lord shows you mercy. 17. Let your dealings with other nations be according to their status to the Church. If they are likewise children of the Holy Mother Church, those nations are your brothers. But if they are children of the whore, those nations are not your brothers and will face imminent condemnation. Heaven has high walls, and so you must always also be mercantile in your dealings with nations under foreign influences and false prophets. And let us learn from God that men are better defined by their behavior and their actions than they are by their declarations. 18. You do not justly rule so that you might see pain in the eyes of your enemy, but so that you see love in the eyes of your beloved ones. When the good prosper, they are like bees that bring you wax and honey, or they are like lambs that give you milk, clothing, and meat. Your judgments protect those ones and condemn those who would take away from their noble works. 19. Remember that men are not to be hated, but only the error that inflicts them is to be condemned. You cannot tolerate their errors, because you would then tolerate your children to be wounded and maimed by the doers of these evils. Make loud these condemnations of evil in order to silence those evils. For if given this chance, these evils will loudly condemn good, will call noble behavior privilege, will envy success, will revile order, will prey upon innocence, and will calumniate you at every turn with each of these injustices if ever you are negligent. 20. We cannot establish the eternal kingdom on earth until we have allowed men to achieve ascendancy. You cannot force man to ascend to his former state before original sin. But your duty is to protect man's ability to ascend by extricating and limiting evil as much as possible without suffocating the good. Remember that you cannot uplift the cockle without risking the wheat, and so your judgments must be precise and executed at the right time. 21. The Mother Church will send you healers to help heal the wounds inflicted by the injustice in the lands, and will send healers to those who live bastardized, contorted, or in distortion. Sin enslaves men, and you have soldiers to protect men from other men, but the church has soldiers to protect men from devils. Always allow the church to work in your kingdom and defer to her judgments above your own. You'll find your own work much easier if you let them do theirs. 22. You yourself must espouse the attitude of true love. And when taking after your example, many more shall take on that attitude of true love, like the great generous King St. Louis IX. Ideally, if this attitude of true love prevails in your kingdom, it will be the kingdom that leads to the everlasting kingdom. 23. When you are troubled, alas, stay close to the sacred hearts of our Lord and Our Lady, and ensure that your kingdoms are constantly living in this consecration. I have nothing greater to say than this.